I know we've been in this sermon series. I see some faces that have not been here before. So for your sake, I do want to tell you a little bit about what the sermon series was. We've had many sermons, but Pastor Nathan had a summary that I think is important for us to kind of know as we get ready for our panelists. They're going to be having questions that they will be answering. You will have an opportunity to ask questions. There are note cards on your table. And Emily will be kind of grabbing your note cards, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can for the time that we have. We probably have about 45 minutes or so to do all of this. But I want you to just kind of listen as we frame what this conversation is about. America has a long history of collective racial trauma, discrimination, and systemic injustice. Today, the country remains racially segregated and politically polarized. Would you say so? I would say so. Yet, this is the good news. The gospel is a story. The gospel provides a path towards repair, healing, and wholeness. The gospel is a story of a God who actively engages in a broken world and its divisions. True repair that we acknowledge the harm that has been occurred, we accept God's path towards healing and wholeness, and we repent of our personal and collective sin. Otherwise, guess what? We will settle for either a superficial kind of unity or some kind of cosmetic diversity that is only skin deep. So our sermon series was focusing on the racial healing, political change, and structural repair that is required for churches and society to be made whole. And the verse that was our focus came from Isaiah 58 in verse 12. And it says, "You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in." So with that context, we want to enter into a discussion. How many of you saw our, what do we call it, a video blog? Podcast. Yeah, podcast. Visual podcast. So you will have seen Elena and Diamond on there, and we have Denzel here, so I'm excited about that. He will be a new kind of face to the conversation. And we just want to kind of get started. But before, I want to start us with prayer, that the Lord will bless our conversation. So let's pray. Father God, we thank you that we have the freedom, first of all, to talk about these things. And we ask, Holy Spirit, that you just continue to rest on our conversation so that we know that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is even more liberty than we can even think of. So, Lord, I pray that your Spirit may be free in our conversation, guide our questions, guide our responses, and may you be glorified, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So we first want to kind of start out with a question to our panel. As you think about all the sermons that you've heard and the podcasts that you've seen or were involved in, what would be some takeaways that you yourself had as you were thinking about this topic?
Yeah, some of the big takeaways are, well, if we look at the reason that we started the series, and one of the reasons we started the series was because at a mid-sized gathering this summer, people had the opportunity to express the reason that they didn't feel welcomed in this space and other spaces that are dominated by like a culture of supremacy, particularly white supremacy, which I hope white people have come to understand doesn't mean that white people are inherently bad people. And I hope that the series has done away with that lie, which is also from the enemy. But the fact that East End Fellowship and other spaces, in our community, have mostly been shaped by a culture that prioritizes and gives more value to whiteness and acting as if you are white. And so, one of the big takeaways from the series is that, as we're practicing church, just because we are Christian and just because we're practicing and worshiping together and doing life together doesn't mean that we're immune to the ways in which the enemy can work to make people feel less than in our space. Right? And even thinking of Easton Fellowship, we're very unique when it comes to church. And I think many of you know that whether it's because you've had other church experiences or because people who know you go to Easton, they either will have a reaction that's like, wow, you go to Easton, I've heard of Easton, or they may have a reaction like, ooh, they may have had a bad experience with Easton. And so we even have to be careful because we have this very from the start of this church, this mission that was very focused on the reconciliation that's needed. But that doesn't mean that it's going to come automatically. It takes work, it takes time. It also takes messing up and learning from mistakes instead of running away. So that's an overall takeaway I have from the series.
Thanks, Denzel. I'd say, to kind of build on what Denzel was saying, one thing I was noticing as I was reflecting on the podcast series and the sermons, I was sensing and experiencing in myself that there's a desire to want to engage in the reparation. There's a desire from various groups of people to want to see repairs, but there also could be this sense of not feeling like you can because there's a lot of trauma that you're trying to heal from. And so you just don't have the capacity to actually engage in that repair because there's a lot of healing that needs to happen before you can really be in a position to do that. Or you're in a place where you're from a minoritized background and you're like, I don't need to think about any kind of repair, but in reality there are other identities or groups or ability statuses or other ways in which there have been chasms that have not been, there have not been any pushing or encouragement or kind of accountability to kind of push toward repair because leaning in on the marginalized identity and not seeing how that could prevent you from actually pushing into other areas of repair that need to happen. Or there could be ways in which there aren't tools or language, like what Elena was talking about, having a white identity, and there really isn't a framework to kind of build out what repair could look like or be sustainable or be supported if you wanted to choose that way of being or showing up in the world. And so, again, I think what I'm trying to say is that I think there are a lot of people who want to really seriously engage in this work, coming from various different identities and places, but it doesn't, it's just really hard to kind of, one, understand that maybe this isn't the time, maybe there's some work that has to be done, some healing, some soul repair that needs to happen first, and there also needs to be community and skill building and capacity building to really do this together as a group. So I'm hoping that as a group we can actually kind of get to that point where wherever we are in the place of trying to actually, in this community, try to be repairers of the breach, to be skilled and stay with each other through the mess ups and the kind of long process. And it's going to be a lifelong process. So, yeah, that's some of the things I've been reflecting on.
For me, one of the things that I have just realized during this series is, first of all, there's a humility in having these conversations. And that it's much easier to say, I think that person or that other community needs this sermon series. We're already, talking about this, you're living this out. And in fact, this is even though we're ending this series now, it's not that we're done with the conversation. It's not that we don't have more to learn, and especially not that we don't have more to practice. Rethinking and learning new concepts is one thing, doing them is another. And another takeaway that I had was just that you might have within your own personal relationships here a lot of people that tend to think and see things similarly to you. That's just a normal process that tends to happen to us. But in fact, there is still a lot of diversity within our space, not just racial or economic, but thought diversity as well. And that we can be attentive to that, and we can learn from that, and that's actually a beautiful asset of this space.
Thank you. for giving us your initial thoughts. We did have some questions that came in prior to today, so we wanted to start out with some of those before we move to the audience's questions. The first one I think I will throw out to you all will be, what advice would you give on how we can engage in one-on-one conversations about race and racial healing?
One-on-one conversations?
Mm-hmm.
Well, since I have the mic, I guess I have to just come up with something. I think, for one, again, humility. We have to listen to each other with curiosity, not just listen to respond. It's very tempting to listen just to respond. We could do that on this panel tonight. And instead, how do we actually open ourselves to rethink things, to be open to what others have to bring to those conversations, and then care for the other person holistically just makes it easier to do that work. The fact that we are in a relationship with each other and we are in community is going to make this a better space for having those one-on-one conversations than if you just go out and start talking to a random person.
I'd say that it's just the practice of being in relationship in general, regardless of what kind of relationship. I can think of multiple moments over the last few weeks where I was like in a particular work context where I had to navigate conflict, or a family context, or in a Christian community context. And being able to show up in those various spaces and have the skills to see the person in front of you, try to assume positive intent, and really actually work to move toward each other versus, to Elena's point, to just be responsive, really is going to build up your capacity to navigate even more challenging situations. Like, for instance, I'll refer to my work situation. So some of you knew I was in California a week ago for a work trip, and we were on the coast in Pacific of California, and we're in this really tense meeting, and there's been a lot of conflict at work, and we're trying to work through this conversation. We're in a home, in an Airbnb home, and all of a sudden, at the height of the conversation, the phones just start blaring, and there's a tsunami warning. So we're all just like running out of the house, looking toward each other for disaster planning. We're like, who has the app to know which elevation to go to? What do you do in a tsunami? We're like asking the neighbors. We're like, who's grabbing the go bag with all the food? And so in that moment, I was realizing that, the leader of my organization was looking to other people, me, other folks, to give guidance and direction, to clearly communicate, and to whoever was showing that they cared the most and was willing to make sure there was a plan and the ability to make sure everyone was safe, that's who folks were going to follow. And so I think it was important to me as we're going through this series. It's a very specific topic. It's around racial justice and repair, but this is a skill that is really applicable everywhere. And so it's something that I've been thinking through and trying to practice myself, and I think it's, again, like I said before, it's going to be a lifelong process.
Well, I don't have a tsunami story, but I definitely have had, just within the past 6 months, my fair share of interpersonal conflict. Before I go on, I just want to say, if any of you ever wondered where it is that I get at least one half of my personality from, my mom is visiting today, and so you can take a chance to talk with her when you have some time. And to update you, my sister is in the hospital. She'll be in the hospital for at least a month getting some psychiatric care. So one of the very practical things I've learned from this past year is I'm not going to say never, but limit any one-on-one communication over text. Like text and email, it can easily be taken out of context. It's inherently not personal, and it's really important if you're going to have a hard conversation with someone to, at the very least, have it over the phone so that people can interpret tone, and not that it's going to go perfectly when it's in person over the phone, but it's going to go much better than if people misinterpret things over text. And two other things I've learned this year are, one, it's okay to say how you feel and someone else not understand it. And it's okay to tell the truth and someone else not understand it. Because, us as believers know the one we follow told the truth and it was killed. And so I'm hoping that none of us will end up killed due to our interpersonal conflicts. But what it does mean is that the truth doesn't inherently mean that you're going to be comforted and treated right and people are going to agree with you, right? And I've had a lot of guidance to come to that point. And so yeah, don't be afraid to just speak the truth and let it sit there, because you have no authority to control how people are going to respond. And the other thing I would say is that space is okay. If you have to make space, whether it's physical space, space in terms of time of talking to someone, it's okay. As long as during that time, it's a time for you to reflect and a time for you to pray and a time for the other person to hopefully reflect you. Like I said, you can't control what they're going to do and pray. That can be a good thing, and it may take years in some cases to solve interpersonal conflicts. There's some that I have been able to solve within the course of some weeks, whether it's figuring out things with my new housemates and just sharing with them that the difficulty I have faced being the only person of color and the only non-Catholic in the house that I live in. That's something that took one day. I just had to share that. There's other cases where things are still being worked out with people, whether it's family or friends. But I guess what I'm saying is it'll be okay when things take time. So.
Thank you all. We've been hearing a lot of words and terms during this series, and there's one in particular I think is probably like a hot button and kind of makes people, the hair on your back bristle up. And so we wanted to address it. Someone actually sent in this question, and all of you do not have to answer, maybe one of you if you want to choose. But this question is around the term white supremacy and what it could look like. And so the question is around what does white supremacy look like? Or give some examples of it, how it plays out in the church. One of you would like to answer that.
This is my job, so I can start us off. To just give a definition of white supremacy that I like from my days at Erebon, it's that white supremacy is a spiritual principality. So it's beyond any person or system. A spiritual principality that is manifested economically, it's legislated politically, and that affects us all relationally. So this is why in this series we've talked about not just interpersonal relationships, but also systems and structures, and obviously the overall spiritual principality. So I've actually reflected on this question a lot over the past week, and I think it's specifically phrased what are some examples of white supremacy in our church? That's a hard question. I think it is always tempting to say, well, we don't have that problem. And of course, we know that's not true. Like Denzel said earlier, the reason this series kind of came into fruition was because of a realization in Midsize that there were people in our space, specifically women of color, I think especially, that did not feel like they could bring their full selves to worship. And that may not be because of any specific communication that ever happened, but that is, I think, the outworking of the spiritual principality that rests inside us and inside our institutions, that there can become patterns of behavior and thought that weren't even spoken into existence, but that we brought in from somewhere else, and then somehow, we see around us things that continue to affirm that, perhaps. And so there's so many ways that white supremacy can show up within a church and that could show up within our space. I've seen us make a lot of intentional choices as a community to minimize that impact. There's so much that I could say about that. I think the fact that we are in this building, that we do not own, that we share with the community, the fact that we don't start on time, and that's okay. The fact that we have a diverse staff that hopefully represents a wider range of the people here. The types of music that we might worship to. But again, we can have these explicit choices and still have things that are within ourselves, our minds, our spirits, that bring in that spiritual principality of white supremacy. And so don't be surprised to have it show up. And also, I say this as a white person, don't be surprised if it's especially hard for you to see it. Because it was created to be that way. And so that is why I'm going to pass the mic, because I have my own blinders and my limitations on this, especially.
Yeah, Nathan and I had a very long conversation about whether to use the word on the title white supremacy or whiteness, and, it's like splitting hairs. But I think part of it is, I like the framing of whiteness more because I think sometimes when folks hear the term white supremacy, they automatically tune out and assume that this has nothing to do with them, or that it just has to do with people who identify as white. And so I think that I think for me, as I've experienced white supremacy, whiteness, white cultural norming, it really is around a way of being. Even the way I'm talking right now, I have learned to speak this way because people respect me because I speak this way. I don't talk this way when I go and I'm around my family. So there are ways in which spaces are structured to be comfortable for certain groups. And if you're a minoritized person, you have to accommodate and make adjustments to make other people comfortable. And so that's really what it's about, is trying to be aware of the ways in which the level of comfort that you're seeking requires other people to be uncomfortable, and ways that we are willing to be uncomfortable for others. And even as a person of color, I'm thinking about, I so appreciate, I love that Mike is here, because it's reminding me of what it was like to live in Peru and to constantly be thinking in two languages. That is so hard. And to navigate the cultural faux pas, the translations, the dynamics, the cultural ways of being in a space. And so I think it's especially important as we're pulling in more people from, outside the black-white dynamic into our group, to be even more aware and acknowledge that we're going to be navigating different cultures, and to be able to release some of the desire to hold on to what's most comfortable, or what is what's most normal, which often is more of a white culturally centric way of being, and to be open and prepared to navigate what it's like to actually be in a multicultural space, because it's awkward. It's extremely awkward. There are moments of trying to readjust and reposition and apologize and come together. And so I'm hopeful that we'll gain the capacity and the skill set to really get there and to do that really well, and to model to other folks that this is what it actually looks like to be in a multicultural space. It's not a place that's a lot of different people are here and folks are comfortable, but we're really working and living and being together.
Well, yeah, those are definitely all things that, I've seen, and agree with here at Eastern Fellowship and outside of Eastern Fellowship. The way I carry myself, the way I speak, it changes if I'm here or in other spaces where there are many white people present, versus if I was at home at a cookout or something like that with my family. And so it is hard to not code switch just because I've been taught years over years that, it's the right thing to do in order to be respected, but also in some cases to survive in certain spaces. So the one thing I'll add is one of the things we talked about at the workshop last week on multiculturalism that Pastor Nathan hosted after Mid-Size Gathering is that often multicultural spaces, even though they've increased over the years, from the 80s until now, I think is the timeline we're looking at. What has happened is that people of color have often been coming into white spaces versus white people going into spaces of people of color. And so, I don't know the full history of how the church began, but, whatever church is trying to do, and trying to live out the gospel, trying to live out a multicultural community, has to be mindful of who are they asking to accommodate, or who are they asking to compromise their values or certain practices and traditions they have in order for us to have the multicultural space, right? And so that's just something to keep in mind as we're moving, whatever our history is. Like I said, I'm not too familiar with it. As we're moving forward, if you're thrown off because worship may sound more like a black church than what you're used to, then reflect on that. And why is it that you feel that way? And what are the ways that you are reacting that may be making it more difficult for us to continue to do that, for example?
Thank you. I was going to go to one of the questions here, the previous questions, but we do have a question that's kind of along the lines of what we're talking about, and maybe it just needs a little more, a deeper dive into the whole concept of being uncomfortable. So the question is being uncomfortable something we have to learn to experience without immediately thinking something is wrong? Is this something we have to learn? Could you unpack a little bit more about that uncomfortability around these topics, or even just living life together in a multicultural space?
I do think that it's helpful to pause and reflect and ask, just sit with yourself in genuine curiosity. If the discomfort is you're actually experiencing harm and trauma, then that's important to recognize and to act accordingly. If the discomfort is you just don't like it, then continue to ask those questions. Why don't I like it? Because it's not familiar to me. Why do I not like things that aren't familiar to me? So continue to just be curious and inquisitive about what's going on with you. I do think that there are two different types of discomfort. One could be a bit more harmful than others, and so I think it's important to kind of sit and reflect on which of those two is actually going on, and then kind of seek kind of the support that you need to address.
Let me just say an obvious, which is that being uncomfortable is uncomfortable. And it's called that for a reason. And yeah, if you are in uncomfortable situations a lot, they become less uncomfortable. Or you become a little bit normalized into what that experience feels like. But there's always going to be those things. And something that's been really helpful for me is there's this tool used, especially for people going into often cross-cultural, maybe different countries, like ministry, missionary work, and it's about how we experience culture shock. But this is just as relevant when we're dealing with people that maybe live next door but are from a different cultural experience than yourself, which is something called the four inevitables. I don't know if I remember the four inevitables, but they're like embarrassment and discomfort and these negative feelings within that we've tried to avoid. And oftentimes when we experience them, we say, something bad is happening, I need to get away. Maybe that's a closed door. This is a bad thing, I need to change course. But when we're talking about cross-cultural interactions, in fact, those are usually signs that you're just having a cultural clash. And if you just turn around and say, this is bad, this is a closed door, you never build a rapport, relationship, understanding. You never get anywhere. And so we have to, I think, not be comfortable with discomfort so much, but we have to change the way that we see the value of discomfort. And say, like, when we experience those feelings, again, ask what Diamond was saying, is this actually harmful, traumatic, etc.? Or is this just a negative feeling that I'd rather run away from, that culture would tell me to run away from, but if I actually sit here, ask some questions, doesn't mean you have to immediately be good with everything, but just be present. You might learn something, you might change your perspective, and that's the value of discomfort.
Well, yeah, I definitely, resonate with what you said, Elena, that being uncomfortable is uncomfortable. I mean, you can't really get around it. It's interesting that when I thought of the question, the first thought I had was, okay, if there is someone who is white and they walk into a situation where they're uncomfortable, but also there's the fact that me as a person of color, other people of color are walking into this space and other spaces, and they are uncomfortable as well. And what does that mean, right? And so, there is a level of just experiencing that discomfort, and as a person of color, because obviously, yes, there's something that you can learn from any situation where you're in a cross-cultural experience. But also, there's a point where your discomfort may mean that you need to say something in order for there to be change, in order for there to be justice, right? And so, if I walk into a room, walk into Easton Fellowship, and for example, I didn't grow up doing a lot of liturgy and service, and so I don't really know how to follow the liturgy for today's service because it's very liturgical, right? Okay, that's a space, that's a time where I need to have a posture of learning and learning this new form of worship. Because it is ultimately a good thing, and it's something that people in this community value, right? And I want to be a part of that. If I'm in a situation where I'm in a conversation and I feel uncomfortable because I was ignored, or if I'm in a space where I'm trying to tell someone the truth, and I'm trying to tell someone how I feel, and my feelings are disregarded, and that makes me feel uncomfortable. My being uncomfortable isn't okay, because that means in those situations, I'm uncomfortable because an injustice has occurred. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the things I've had to learn is that if you're in a place where you're uncomfortable and you've reflected, or even if you know in that moment it's because you've been treated wrong or an injustice has occurred, don't be afraid with wisdom to speak up. And don't feel like you're a burden for doing so. And so, yeah, that's just something to keep in mind, that discomfort doesn't always mean that you need to be in a place to just experience it and just get over it. Sometimes you need to say something if you're being treated wrong, or if someone else is being treated wrong, and you know that deep in your heart.
I just want to ask you all one question. Who has chosen to be here at East End Fellowship because it's a comfortable space? Okay. I just want to say that is not an abnormal thing at many churches, to choose to be part of a space that generally feels comfortable. That doesn't mean you always are uncomfortable here, but we haven't chosen to be part of a community together because it's easy and cozy. Mm-hmm. We've chosen to be part of this community because we see some value in the challenge, and then we can do something with that if we practice the things that my panelists have mentioned.
We do have one more question that came in earlier that we do want to get to, and time is running out, but I didn't know if you all had any questions that you had on the cards you wanted to give to Emily, because we did want to get some questions answered on the spot. No? Okay. This last question that kind of came in earlier talked about kind of the family space and how to function there. So it's really for parents and how to have open conversations regarding race and trauma with their kids. So what could it look like for families, specifically white families, to have a family culture that talks about these hard things with their kids?
Wait a minute. You're the only parent. I am not an expert. How do we do? I think one thing that's helpful is to just be transparent about how it's a challenge for you. You know, just talk about like, what is your process of learning how to be in a relationship with people who aren't like you, who you're trying to get closer to, and becoming closer to different types of families, hearing some of the stories and the things that they're experiencing, and empathizing and mourning and being with them, and really kind of talking about the experiences and lived experience, the real stories of, for example, if someone has a family member that was lost to gun violence and you've attended their funeral, you can kind of talk through the mourning process, the experience. So really connecting it to the life that you're trying to live, maybe the fact that you are still learning and you're still trying to understand, connecting it to the fact, to the examples of the things that you're trying in terms of trying to better understand and building relationship, and then also connecting it to opportunities to have your children build real meaningful relationships with other children that aren't like them. And that is a huge, sometimes can be a huge challenge. I think about that with my kids because I'm like, they're at the age where I'm thinking about what kind of activities I'd like to include them in. But I'm also like, okay, I'm going to have to sit in the stands with other moms that do not look like me, and I'm going to have to make small talk, and the kids are going to have to figure out how to code switch and how to navigate that kind of environment. And so that's a reality, to Denzel's point. As a minoritized kid and minoritized families, we are going to have to navigate in majority culture, so we'll have to learn those things. But majority families can also be very aware and present and cognizant of that, and kind of talk through what other children may be experiencing as they are socializing with your kids or socializing in a space where they're the one and only. So I really think connecting it to stories, being honest about the challenges that you're going through and the things that you're trying to learn as a parent, and also trying to encourage and create opportunities for your children to really have real meaningful cross-cultural experiences that are not tokenizing, that are not like, this is so exotic, we're having this experience. It's like, no, this is like, like I love the food or I love the dance. Like, it is a beautiful thing, but you want to, as much as you can, create authentic connections with people as adults and for your children as much as you can. You all have been children, so
having a child, and I am very grateful to my own family for exposing me to these topics at a younger age. Of course, there's ways that they could have done it better, and I want to say that from the beginning because that's going to be true for every person that's a parent, and perfection is not the goal. But as someone that grew up in a white family, as a white person, I am really grateful that I was exposed to these conversations from a young age. In society, right now, we hear people talking about, on a politicized level, a lot like the danger of talking about race or culture, and trying to take these things out of our conversations, especially within school. I think there's a lot of fear there, and a fear that if we talk about it, that somehow that makes it real, when in fact it's always been real. Again, the spiritual principality becomes more powerful when we don't acknowledge it, we don't talk about it, and that when we talk to our kids, or when our kids are talked to about these things, that does not mean that they then take on those harmful mindsets. They're gaining that harmful mindset probably from other spaces already. You can be a countering voice. And it also, especially like a lot of minority children, they learn what it means to be in a body of color from a young age. Often connected to traumatic experiences, unfortunately. I think it would benefit white children to learn what it means to be in a white body from a young age. And that doesn't have to just be a shame experience, it just is a reality. And for me, that was a central question to my life for many, many years. It's still a question to my life. What does it mean to be in a white body? But that's a question that has led me towards others rather than away.
Yeah, those are all things that are really important. And the only thing I would add is, when we're talking about all of the questions that you've had, just remembering that what we have mentioned is along the lines of what Jesus did, right? And so we talked about interpersonal conflict. Jesus had plenty of interpersonal conflict, whether he was the one involved or he was the mediator between the disciples and their craziness, right? The one story that came to mind when I was saying to not argue things over text was when Nicodemus reaches out to Jesus and Jesus has a sit-down meeting with him. And he explains to him what it means to be born again. And then, when it comes to white supremacy and being like in a white-centric space, Jesus was a refugee Palestinian Jew living in a Roman-controlled world, right? He was always in a white-controlled space throughout his ministry. And the way he approached that was he wasn't afraid to be who he was and tell the truth, all the things that we mentioned. And thinking about teaching children, Jesus was open, and he said those who cause children to stumble are bad people, right? And so we can't hide from kids the things that are going on in this world. Within reason, obviously, you should protect kids from things that they may not quite be able to understand or deal with. But the posture we should have with children is not to hide them or to protect them from things that they have to know in order to exist, in order to be safe, in order to treat people well, right? And, some of the things I thought of are when you're working with kids, teaching them what it means to think, to have a flexible mindset, to think openly, to be open to learning, because as a parent, you're not going to be able to teach, or I hope teaching in high school now, as a teacher, as anyone who's looking to teach kids, you're not going to be able to teach them everything. But the way that we set them up to approach learning or information has so much to do with how they react to that new information, right? And so you have to teach a posture of openness. And the other thing that is really damaging is when, for example, if a white kid is taught that, not all black people are bad because of Dr. King, or because of Barack Obama, or because of Michelle Obama, or because of Jackie Robinson. And so white kids, especially in my town, are given all these examples of the model minority, for example. The talented 10, as W.B. Du Bois put it. And so in their mind, a black person is good as long as they fit into white culture, as long as they're successful. And so if you see a black man in a suit, he's okay. If you see a black woman on the street with their kid and homeless, she did something inherently wrong, and she's not worthy of your attention. Right? And so one of the beautiful things that I've seen families here at East End do is not do that. Is not just given this singular view of what it means to be black. Yes, there are successful black people in the world, and they have not been given the attention and credit they deserve. At the same time, we are a very large population. We're a very diverse population. Some of us are doing well. Some of us are still struggling. Too many of us are still struggling. And that is the reality. And so if you can teach your kid that whether it's people who are black, whether it's people who are Hispanic, whether it's people who are Asian, not all Asians are doctors. Not all Hispanic people do this thing or that thing. Not all black people do this thing or that thing. But it's a race of people. We have a history, and all of us, just like white people, have gone on different paths and have lived different lives because of that. And we're all worthy of dignity and respect, not because you want to give it, but because God has already given it, and you just have to accept it.
We are actually at 5:30 at our point to wrap this up, but I wanted to give the panelists one more opportunity to give maybe, a one-sentence charge or something to our folks. I know we always want to know, well, what do we do next? It doesn't have to be that, but some kind of charge that would help us to continue to dig deeper and maybe start our journey. But wherever you are in that journey, whether you're further along or thinking about starting, what would that charge be to continue?
I'll just pick up a little bit more on the kid conversation. I think one thing that I've been trying to really internalize and figure out how to live out and remember is that, I love my kids. They are beautiful little angels until they're not, but they are wonderful. And, my children's well-being is not the only thing I need to worry about. These other kids in our community, their well-being is so important as well. And so the better I can be at learning how to be in relationship and community and invested in the well-being of the families here, just as much as I've invested in my own, the healthier our whole community is going to be. And so that is what I'm trying to practice and learn how to do. And to do that, it requires me to try to break through these breaches. It breaks through the breaches of racism, of socioeconomic status, of language barriers, of other things. And so I have to continually be working through these breaches to be able to connect to the whole. And so that is what I would encourage you all to do, is to work through the discomfort, to break through these breaches, to repair them, to have some vision, to think through things that have never been tried before. Try them now, because we need it. We need some vision. We need some new approaches. We need to try things that are going to actually bring us together and to demonstrate to the world what a community of Christ followers actually looks like. And we have an opportunity to do that. And so I'm on the journey to do that. If you're willing to do that with me, I'm available.
Some of you may have heard me say this before, but one of the best pieces of advice that I got from a wonderful mentor and professor in college was to live the questions. And that didn't make a lick of sense to me. As many times as he said it, live the questions. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? It makes sense once you're in the situation to do it. Many of us never have language to put to that, but to live the questions is to acknowledge when something doesn't make sense, rubs you the wrong way maybe, that discomfort that we talked about earlier, and to, instead of trying to resolve it immediately, to just continue to be present in the question without insisting on an answer. Saying that maybe, just maybe, things make a bit more sense than they do right now. Not going to judgment immediately. And I have found some of the best insights of my life through that practice. Ones that I had no idea would come because of waiting and being willing to live in the question.
Yeah, those are good things to be curious and to be patient is not something that I'm good at. And yeah, it's a care for more than just yourself, like recognizing that family is more than just your bloodline. It's really a unique aspect of this church, and it's something that we need more of in this country, in this community. The one thing I can think of as a final charge is whether right now or later today or later this week, ask yourself, do I really believe that God is in control? And do I really believe that the life I'm living now is only the beginning and is not the end? That eternal life is actually real. Not just a concept that we talk about in moments when we want to talk about, what will heaven look like, or if we're really down and we want to feel better about ourselves. But every single day, do you truly believe that if you were to mess up every single thing that people expect of you, that will it be okay with you? And if you live life from that perspective, and it's something I'm trying to do, these are questions that I'm struggling with, especially this past week. If you live life from that perspective, if you mess up, if you confront an injustice that you see and it makes you feel uncomfortable, if you try but fail to teach your kid about racism or injustice, if you drop the ball on something, if you mess up a relationship, in the grand scheme of things, those things are small but also really out of your control. And so some people can take that and go the direction of saying, well, if it's out of my control, if I'm going to heaven, why does it matter? And I'm just gonna go about doing my own thing and live like a very selfish lifestyle. But we know from the scriptures that is not what God calls us to do. God calls us to take that comfort and that peace that goes beyond understanding and to carry it with us into the hard things so that we can endure, so that we can have endurance, so that we can reach the point when we will all be together and things will all be right, even if we can't see it, because faith is belief in things that are unseen, right? And so, just ask yourself back to the basics of why we're all here and what we're all taught, whether it's when we're kids or when we're in college ministry or youth ministry, is do we actually believe in God? Do we love Him with all of our hearts, all of our minds, and all of our soul? And do we love the people that He put beside you at your table and in your home and in your work and your community? And that should give you the endurance to work through all of these difficult questions that we've tried to answer today.
Thank you. Let's give the panel a hand. Thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful time, and we will continue our worship, but continue to pray and press in. Pray for our panelists. Thank you all for just sharing of yourself. And we have a lot of things to think about and a charge. We're going to do this. We can do this. We can live this because of Christ.